Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. We're going to start our Sunday program. And today we have part 2 of our Sunday program, Islamic History series with Dr. Mahmood Ibrahim. Until recently, Dr. Mahmood Ibrahim was a professor of history at California State Polytechnic University at Pomona, Cal Poly Pomona, where he taught courses on Islam, the Middle East, and North Africa, and historiography on the undergraduate and graduate levels. In addition to teaching, he represented the history department in the Cal Poly Pomona Academic Senate for several 3-year terms and chaired several Senate committees, including the Academic Programs Committee, the Faculty Affairs Committee, and the General Education Committee, and co-chaired the Curriculum Conversion Committee tasked with converting the general education courses as well as the general curriculum from quarter to semester system. He also served as the chair of the history department for 2 terms, from 1996 to 2004. He was awarded the Hart Award for Outstanding Faculty Leadership in 2017. Born as a refugee in the West Bank town of Ramallah, few months after the Nakba, when his family and the whole village of Jimzu were driven out by Zionist militias. Dr. Mahmood Ibrahim immigrated to the United States in 1966 and lived in New York City's Lower East Side. He received his BA from the City College of New York in 1973. Dr. Ibrahim then moved to Los Angeles and attended UCLA, from which he received his MA in 1974 and PhD degree in 1981. As a scholar of Middle Eastern studies, he was awarded several Fulbright grants and National Endowment for the Humanities Fellowships to conduct research in Cairo and Damascus. He participated in several summer seminars funded by the National Endowment for the Humanities, Islamic Science at Columbia University, Just War and Jihad at Rutgers University, and St. Francis of Assisi, and his time in Siena, Italy. Dr. Ibrahim taught as a visiting lecturer at UCLA, UC Santa Barbara, and UC Riverside before he went to Birzeit University, where he became chair of the Department of History, Geography, and Political Science from 1985 to 1989, most notably during the First Intifada, when the university and teaching went underground. He is the author of 2 books, Merchant Capital and Islam, University of Texas Press, 1991, and The Oral History of the Intifada in Arabic with Tom Ricks and Adil Yahya. He is the author of numerous book reviews and articles on early Islamic history, including the Abbasid Minna Religious Inquisition as Social Policy and Naskh, the Social Origins of Quranic Abrogation. He also authored several articles on medieval Damascus, including Health and Hygiene in Early Mamluk Damascus and Writing Women's Lives, turning obituaries into life histories. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Mahmood Ibrahim.
Thank you.
Make this bigger. Okay, thank you so much. So all you'll need to do is just, when you want to go to the next slide, just click on right here. And it will show. So for each one, like that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here. Let me first start by bringing to your attention some of these publications. They're very accessible and available, actually. They just deal with the Islamic science, the various aspects of it. Some of these books I used to assign for my classes. So I'm going to put them on the chair, and if you want to take a look at them. So this is by Manfred Ullman. It's on Islamic medicine. It's a very thin book. There are other publications, of course, like Emily Savage Smith. The House of Wisdom. This is really a great book. I used to assign, again, this graduate and undergraduate. This is by Ihsan Masood. this book called Science and Islam. It's a companion to a three-part series that was done by the BBC with Jim Al-Khalili. I don't know if you have heard of Jim Al-Khalili. Is a Iraqi British scientist, physicist actually, who did this three-part series, and you can get it on YouTube. It's a very fantastic series. I used to ask my students to take a look at those and write book reports, so to speak, on those. So Ihsan Masood is a companion to Jim Al-Khalili's three-part series on BBC. This one is Science in Medieval Islam by Howard Turner. Again, is a accessible discussion of Islamic science and the variety of Islamic science. And lastly, this is a book by the National Geographic, 1001 Inventions as a Legacy of Islamic Civilization. So I'm going to put them on the chair. If you feel like taking a look at them, please do so. During last lecture, I discussed Islamic civilization, especially the social sciences, mostly also religious sciences. Today will be the physical sciences or natural sciences. Let me start again by emphasizing that Islamic civilization in general and its scientific legacy in particular is the heritage of many civilizations. And this diagram will show the flow of knowledge that eventually formed the basis of Islamic knowledge and Islamic science that would flourish, let's say, from the 18th to the 14th century of the Common Era, and during which the Muslim scientists will make their contributions. Now, of course, always we have to clarify when we talk about Islamic science, this is a science that flourished or was produced within, within Islamic civilization. That is from Central Asia to the Atlantic. Sometimes it's called Arabic science. And in that sense, it is the science that was produced in Arabic. That is, Arabic became the language of culture, the language of literature, the language of administration, and certainly the language of science, especially after the reforms of the Umayyad Caliph Abd al-Malik, who ruled from 685 to about 705. No. In Damascus, and he introduced reforms that made Arabic the language of the administration in place of the various languages that existed previously. And more specifically, also after the Abbasid Caliphate that instituted and sponsored the translation of the scientific knowledge that was obtained in the region, and the scientific knowledge that is obtained in the region actually was made up of all of these civilizations. So in the sense, once again, of Islam being the beginning of modern times that is separated from antiquity, because it was based on knowledge. It was based on reading. It was based on research. The Quran contains so many verses and so many chapters that ask the individual to contemplate, ask the individual to think, ask the individual to research, to find out, and therefore knowledge is a solid foundation of Islamic civilization, and that it actually produced one of the greatest achievements of humankind until that time, and is more specifically after 750, when the Chinese process of making paper was brought into Baghdad, and paper was actually one of the magnificent contributions of Islamic civilizations to the western part of this globe at that time. And indeed, parchment that was existed before and reed paper, etc., was all substituted by this process, a magnificent process of creating paper. Now, the translation movement is once again, it was sponsored by the caliphs, more specifically the Abbasid caliphs. And Abu Ja'far al-Mansur, the second caliph, started it out, and it really matured, so to speak, during the caliphate of Al-Ma'mun. Al-Ma'mun, who was caliph from 812 to 832 of the Christian era, was himself a scholar, a philosopher, and used to engage in the many scholarly debates that came to be had in what is known as Bayt al-Hikmah, or the House of Wisdom. Actually, one of the titles of the books that I put there is The House of Wisdom, and it is in reference to that particular library where these books were translated and copied several times over, bound, and then distributed to the various libraries of the caliphate. These translations were a two-step translation. Sometimes they'll be translated from Greek to Syriac, and then from Syriac to Arabic. So you had a multilingual staff at these translations, and they became to be specialized. So engineering tracts, let's say from and mathematical tracts from Hindi or from Greek would be the specialty of Abu Ja'far ibn Musa ibn Shakir and his family. Those medicine would be the specialty of Ibn Ishaq al-Harrani. Philosophy, cosmology, astronomy will be the supervised, that is, by Ibn Farrakhan Yaqub al-Kindi. And all of these to give the translation as a solid foundation in accuracy as much as possible. Of course, that is a testament also to the language itself that was accommodating to all of these scientific, new scientific terms that began to be had, especially for the medical text, the philosophical text, and the astronomical text that were being translated. So it is, once again, the translations from all of these various civilizations was the foundation of Islamic achievements. Now, every item that I'm going to go through can be subject of a long series of lectures or seminars, as a matter of fact, right? It's not and so we have only about 30 or 40 minutes, and so it's gonna has to be so brief and just in an outline form. So the fields of knowledge have varied. We talk about the first is alchemy and chemistry. Now, alchemy, of course, in the ancient world and the medieval world was concerned with transforming metals. They had the idea that metal is made of several parts, and 4 parts specifically, and all of the metal is a variation of the components. And so if you vary these things, you might get to the precious metal. Usually they want to get gold, and how to make gold. And so that is the process actually that started out and eventually led to the chemical processes, distillation, And as is indicative of this particular diagram here, is distilling something from another material. Eventually, of course, the distillation process would produce and make important contribution towards another science called pharmacology, which I will mention later. And so even though no one was able to find that elixir, that substance that is responsible for changing the nature of the metal, that gave the impetus to the rise of chemistry. Another field is actually, I didn't bring this book because I was able to put it on the on the slideshow, and I had to eliminate those because I couldn't mail, such a huge PowerPoint. And so Andrew Watson wrote this agricultural innovation in the early Islamic world, and where he discusses the importation, hybridization, and the diffusion of agricultural products from the known world, and then eventually to diffuse, that is, to spread it out to other parts of the world. Sugarcane, for example, is something that has been documented, and the movement of sugarcane, that sweet substance that brought us all, slavery in the New World, started out from India to lower Iraq to Egypt. Egypt was the producer of sugar, manufactured sugar, for several centuries, actually. Eventually, when the Crusades invaded the Levant and the Middle East, they found this sweet substance, and they began to imitate the process, and eventually the process goes into the Canary Islands. From the Canary Islands, after 1500, is brought to the New World and eventually to Hawaii. And so you can, sugar is one of the legacies, and sugar is a product that requires a great deal of processes. And so it's an agribusiness. So agribusiness, plantation, is one of those contributions, if you want, of some of the merchants, elite, investors in the Islamic world. Cotton, sorghum, so the cotton, of course, is the production of textiles, and eventually Egypt becomes the producer of a great number of varieties of textiles. Until today, Al-Mahal al-Kubra in the Nile Delta is one of the great textile manufacturing centers of the Middle East. Dyes, and of course, with agriculture, you have the need for canals, the need for dams, the need for dikes, the need for all of the infrastructure that is required for an agricultural input. And so along with the manufacture of systems, and they make...
It's easier for people to see.
All right, good, thanks. Okay. So you can see here examples of some issues that require or that involved in agriculture, and that is books that describe the plantation process, the care process of the variety of plants. Here you have a description of sumac, you have a description of the cypress tree, and indeed the Andalusia in Spain was one of the centers for the production of these particular books because of the diffusion of these agricultural products and how to care for them. In addition to that, you have systems like the picture on top there. These are underground water reservoirs that were built so that they can keep, remember, the Middle East is a dry region. and has been dry region for millennia, and therefore the preservation of water is very precious. Underground canals, this one in particular, here is in Iran, and in Iran, actually, they perfected the system of qanats to distribute water to the variety of regions. The system of building qanats or canals, underground canals, itself was the subject of diffusion in Morocco, in the Sahara. I used to take students to a particular area of southern Morocco where the canals are still there. Of course, dry right now, they don't use them, but there are this diffusion from Iran all the way to the Atlantic is a testament to the spread of agriculture as well as the technology that is required for agriculture. This particular picture is of what is known as Nauria. These are big water wheels that this particular one is in Hama, northern Syria, central Syria, and on the river Orontes, where the big wheel brings up the water to a particular canal and then on the rooftop, so to speak, and that is distributed to the variety or various fields around. So the agricultural technology is not only in terms of the plants and hybridization and the diffusion, but in the upkeep and the care that is necessary for these plants. So this doesn't work here?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Other examples of textbooks that deal with agriculture, and of course, the medicines that were extracted from plants. And this, again, the process is this particular one discusses the making of cough syrup, basically. And so how, the various substances that are involved and how to put them together, compound medicines as they are called. So we have seen chemistry and alchemy, which are also responsible for making some kind of medicines and distilled chemicals, agriculture and agronomy, and then we move to astronomy. Astronomy was really one of the greatest contributions to from Islamic civilization to Renaissance Europe and eventually to the modern world. And one of the first things that the Muslim scientists have done was translate a lot of Hindi textbooks called Zij, and these are like timetables for the heavenly movements of stars. And the first thing that they noticed is that the Earth's tilt, of course, is, as we know, the Earth is tilted, and the calculation of the Greeks as well as the Indians were off by here and there a little bit, so that one of the first contributions of the Muslim astronomers is the correction of the tilt, the calculation of that tilt. And so you can see how the correction is now and it remains at 23.5 degrees as a contribution of Muslim astronomers. These contributions vary, and it is significant because their astronomy is necessary for Islam, for Islamic practice. One of the first things that we notice is for example, the time of prayer. The time of prayer is in the morning it's easy, and in the evening it's easy. In the late evening, it's a little bit tricky because then you're going to have to distinguish between a white thread and a black thread. The noon prayer is easy. You can see when there is no shadow because the Earth is right at the center of the sky. The afternoon prayer is the trickiest one of all, and that begins to the mathematical and astronomical inquiries. And the afternoon prayer is actually determined by the time when the shadow of an object is half its length. Twice its length. And so that in itself has led to the calculations that would eventually lead to speculations into astronomy. Yeah, the month of Ramadan, for example, when does the month come? When does it start? The location of Mecca, if you are in Andalusia, if you are in Baghdad, if you are in Samarkand, if you are in Fez, where is Mecca? And so once again, these things require Muslims to be accurate. And indeed, in this accuracy, they begin to be good astronomers. And of course, their astronomy actually was built on a translation of some Greek as well as Hindi texts, and most specifically in terms of the Greek text is Ptolemy's. And although Ptolemy's theory of the universe was, of course, eventually found to be erroneous, Muslims took a while before they were able to prove, to themselves at least, that Ptolemy was wrong and needs to be corrected. But in terms of looking into the sky, this particular, I don't know if you can tell really I can't tell from here, but if you can tell, many of the bright stars are actually Islamic names. And one of the important persons who gave these stars their names, Al-Dabran, for example, Bayt al-Qaws, we call it Betelgeuse in Orion's nebula. These are Arabic names. Rijl or Rigel, this is the foot, basically. That's what it means. Bayt al-Qaws is where the arrow quiver. And so all of these are names that Vega, so all of these names have been given to these stars by Arab astronomers, Islamic astronomers, I should say, because sometimes they're Arab, sometimes they're Persian, sometimes they're, nowadays from the areas, geographically speaking, of Afghanistan, India, and as well as other places. These two images are actually, I got it. Basically of the heavens and the discussion of the stars. There are many astronomers whose mention really should be made at any time one discusses astronomy. And the first one, of course, is Ibn Sufi, as I mentioned, who gave the names of all of these stars, and I will have a chance to show more. But Al-Biruni, who is comes from the area of Afghanistan today, was a polymath, an astronomer, a poet, you name it, a philosopher. And he's the first one actually to illustrate the phases of the moon. Speaking of a total eclipse about 2 weeks ago, he is also the first person to explain the phenomena of the eclipse. It's a natural phenomena of the eclipse as he showed it. And you can see it's written actually in Persian, right? It's not an Arabic text right here. These are the various phases of the moon that he made. These are the illustrations of Ibn Sufi on the various stars. The famous Centurion, and once again, these are Ibn Sufi's illustrations. The various rulers actually also contributed to the advance of astronomy by building and sponsoring observatories. The Maraga School in northwest Persia, northwest Iran, was famous for its contributions to astronomy during the high Middle Ages. And one of the greatest astronomers at the time was Nasruddin Tusi. Nasruddin Tusi actually was the astronomer of none other than Hulegu, who destroyed Baghdad. So Nasruddin Tusi was able to convince Hulegu that he can tell the future, astrology, right? And so this is how, once again, astrology is the basis for the greater advancement in astronomy. The same thing with alchemy and finding the elixir was the basis for the advancement in chemistry. Scientists, this is an Ottoman era illustration showing all kinds of astronomers discussing their craft. So it was a collective thing. This is the astrolabe, which is, again, one of the contributions of Islamic civilization. It can find the latitude and altitude, and therefore you can find not only the stars in heaven, but also the locations of the various cities of the Islamic world. And of course, the Islamic world was such a vast expanse that this kind of knowledge was necessary so that the connections can be made between the various parts of the Islamic world. The person that I should mention again in connection to astronomy is the timekeeper of the Mosque of Damascus. Mosque of Damascus is one of the architectural features of Islamic civilization. And for a while during the early 14th century, the timekeeper, the person who calls for prayer, needed also to have an accurate scale. And actually, Ibn Shatir, that's his name, Ibn Shatir has, and the clock continues to be seen at the Umayyad Mosque of Damascus for accurate telling of the time. Matter of fact, the House of Wisdom, by the way, starts as a discussion of how the West at the time did not know how to keep time. They had also their times of prayer and Vespers and all of that, but they didn't know how to keep time. And one particular cleric, who eventually became a pope, by the way, came down from France and was educated in Spain, in Islamic Spain, and he brought back to the monasteries in France the science of timekeeping. They thought he was a heretic by the time. But of course, eventually he became a pope because of the knowledge that he had acquired. So Ibn Shatir actually is referred to in the literature as pre-Copernicus Copernicus, because Ibn Shatir is the Muslim astronomer who discovered through his observations that Ptolemy's Almagest, that is the particular book that I mentioned earlier, was wrong. And that is that it's not everything that goes around the Earth. It's actually the other way around, and that Earth actually goes around the sun, right? And so for Islam, for that doesn't matter. For the Christians, of course, it was a little bit tricky and a little bit difficult, and it was really an anathema or a heresy to point that out. And that's why Copernicus was such a big deal when he came out with his solar based theory. But the particular people who research Islamic astronomy and refer to pre-Copernicus Copernicus actually show how much Copernicus was indebted to Ibn Shatir and his books that were available to Copernicus in Istanbul, Constantinople, and also in Rome, because all of these books that the Muslims produced after the 11th century were also translated back to Latin. And so as the Muslims had their translation movement for a couple of centuries centered in Baghdad, the Christians, the medieval West, had their translation movement to retranslate everything from Arabic back to Latin. Latin was being the language of learning at the time. And so they had a center of translation at Toledo, a center of translation at Palermo in Sicily, a center of translation in Canossa in southern Italy, and a center actually in Antioch, northern Syria. The most prolific, of course, were in Toledo and in Palermo to translate back. And these translations became to be the basis upon which the Renaissance was built, and eventually, of course, in Western Europe, what had developed after the Renaissance. And so after Ibn Shatir, I just want to show, this is the treatises of At-Tusi. It's called the Tusi couple. And if you really Google Tusi couple, Tusi couple, you see this, and you can see it in animation. And in particular, this was in an effort to understand the position of Mercury. Mercury is a very tricky planet because it is so close to the sun that it is, you get blinded by the sun looking at it. And so it's very difficult to find Mercury. And so theoretically speaking, Tusi was able to look at this, and this actually diagram can be animated. And from this animation, you can find so many other forms that eventually become part of the designs of Islamic civilization, designs of mosaics and others. It is very, very nice to see that in animation, actually. So these are books actually translated from Hindi, and this is what is known as Zij. Zij, of course, is the astronomical tables that eventually come into Europe by the 13th and 14th century, so that they can also begin to have an accurate prediction when is a month start, when the moon, when there is all of these celestial changes. So they were able to find, and this is an indication of how advanced they became in their observation, to create celestial globes as well as globes in on the grounds. So again, all of this is a testament to their advancement in astronomy. Astronomy, of course, was significant in geography, topography, and cartography. Once again, the Islamic world is so vast, you needed to know how to go from one place to another. So you needed to know roads, you needed to know paths, you needed to know climates, you needed to know products, you needed to know all these kinds of information if you're a merchant, for example, go traveling from one place to another. And so geography is the actually description of regions, description of their climates, description of their products. Again, the topography, where things are, hills and passes and all. And map making, cartography, became a very important part of the science that was dependent, of course, on the astrolabe, dependent on the knowledge that had been had. And so you can, again, these are examples of some of the description. This is the Nile. You can see how already way back they are talking about the sources of the Nile, the sources that have not been discovered by Europe until the 19th century. Again, description of seas, description of bays, description of all these kinds of geographical features, Asia. And here, I guess I skipped a little bit. I just want to show this particular map. This is the most famous map of the Middle Ages. This is Idrisi's map that he did for Roger II, who was a ruler of Sicily at the time. And you can see how it is actually upside down, because that's, in terms of their vision, this is how it was. And so you can flip this and see if the accurate type of description. And Idrisi was a prolific author, but this is the particular map that comes along with the book that he gave for Roger II. And so the connectivity of the Islamic world is actually indicates how important the science of geography and cartography was. Mathematics, of course, until today, we talk about logarithms. Al-Khwarizmi is the individual mathematician who brought in that science to the Islamic world, eventually to Europe. Muhammad ibn Musa al-Khwarizmi is founder, if you want, of the science of trigonometry. Omar ibn al-Khayyam, we usually associate him being a poet, but he was actually one of the most lucid mathematicians of the Middle Ages. All of this, of course, put in the types of designs and architectural features, the arch, the dome, all of these issues of Islamic architecture and the fantastic buildings that they had built that continue to amaze and become cultural heritage of the civilization or the culture where they exist, like the Taj Mahal, Alhambra in Spain, and in Isfahan, for example, Shah Abbas's mosque. Mechanics, this is another science that they excelled at, and these are automata, that is, how to automate things from water clocks to water wheels. Now, the medical sciences are the crown jewels of astronomy, and medical sciences were really the major contributions of Islamic civilization. And the medical sciences, of course, include medicine, medical ethics, the foundation of hospitals or bimaristans, the foundation of optics of Ibn al-Haytham, the science of ophthalmology. The Middle East has a particular issue with eye disease, and so eye disease becomes a particular concern of Muslim physicians, and ophthalmology, therefore, was one of those sciences that flourished. Pharmacology, as I mentioned, is related to medicinal plants and the process of extracting the medicine from those plants. Pharmacology, Avicenna himself is one of the great physicians of the Islamic world. Avicenna, when he was 21, he's a self-taught polymath. He's one of those geniuses that exist every 1,000 years or so. By the age of 21, he had mastered all of the knowledge, all of the sciences that could be had in the Islamic world. His correspondence with Al-Biruni is actually amusing sometimes, because Avicenna would be like impatient because he couldn't find the right answer from such a polymath as Al-Biruni himself. By the way, Al-Biruni is credited for the first primary source on the history of India prior to the 10th century, because he actually came down to India, so to speak. Well, it was all part of the Indian at the time. Now we talk about the geography of the modern age, sometimes is misleading, and learn Sanskrit so that he can write the history. And as such, his books are actually a primary source for the Hindi. So he's a polymath of the first degree and contemporary to Avicenna. Avicenna wrote a book called the Canon or Al-Qanun fi Tib. The canon in English was the basis of medical knowledge in Europe all the way to the 17th century. It was translated so many times, and the translation itself was refined so many times. And actually, a scholar who studied the variety or the various iteration of the canon in medicine has won the McCarthy Award, the Genius Award. Her name is Nancy Saraisi, just by studying the various editions of Ibn Sina or Avicenna as they existed in Renaissance Italy. Pharmacology, of course, also was another Al-Biruni's specialty, known as Kitab as-Saydala. So there are so many physicians that are of note. Abu Musa al-Khawarizmi and Ar-Razi, man from Rai, actually. He was the chief physician of Rai. It's like modern-day Tehran, and also of Baghdad. It is very well known about the issue when he was asked to build a hospital in Baghdad, where he apparently took a piece of meat and put several places in Baghdad, and eventually within several days he checked which is the piece that is the freshest, and of course he decided that that area was best to build a hospital because it is not as contaminated or is polluted as other places. And so he was the chief physician actually of Baghdad as well as Rai, and his Kitab al-Mansuri is one of the major textbooks of medicine that was once again translated into Latin after the Crusades, after the 11th century. Many discoveries, many firsts in Islamic medicine. The first, of course, is the hospitals that eventually became part and parcel of Islamic medicine. And what makes Islamic medicine actually unique and original is that medicine was not reserved for the elite only. It was for everybody. And in that sense, it was actually the responsibility of the governor, the ruler, and the elite to endow these areas so that they can take care of the population, no matter what class, no matter who the person is. And so as hospitals, of course, began to be centers of the study of medicine. That's just like today, hospitals are also the centers for the study of medicine. And here you have a diagram to show the skeletons. This one is actually in reference to Ibn al-Nafis, who was a great Al-Haytham, I'm sorry, Ibn al-Haytham, Al-Hazan, as he's known in Europe, who actually, for the first time, corrected all of the ideas about vision, how vision is manifested in and created what's known as camera obscura, as well as the first scientific method. Now, the scientific method, of course, is specifically, you put a hypothesis, you experiment it, and you come to the result according to the experiment, and you repeat it. And this is the idea: is that it's repeated, and if you don't get the same result, there's something wrong. All right. So indeed, Al-Hazan maybe 300 years before Newton, who's usually credited with the scientific method in Europe. Al-Hazan or Ibn al-Haytham was it. And this is his book on optics. The word lens, for example, comes from the Arabic adasa. So adasa means lentils. And eventually the word lentil was elated to become lens. And so his work was exemplary once again because ophthalmology and optics, of course, have related, was necessary for the people in the region. Eye disease was prevalent. Circulation Ibn Nafis is a physician who's actually was trained by and migrating. And this is how Ibn Nafis can be seen as an example of the plurality of Islamic medicine, which is a feature of Islamic medicine, is that he was trained by a physician who had just arrived from Baghdad into Damascus. Eventually, Ibn Nafis goes to Cairo and becomes the chief physician of the first Mamluk emir, Baybars I. And one of his students, Ibn al-Quth, actually is a Christian. And so even way back into the late 13th century, Christians and Jews can be educated by Muslims and work their craft without having to convert. Should have mentioned earlier on, and of course the first diagram shows that the physicians were multicultural, multilingual, multi-religious, Christian, Jewish, Zoroastrian were practicing medicine amongst the Muslims. And so another, the circulatory system was also an advance of the Muslims. Surgery is another issue, and one of the greatest surgeons is actually known as the father of modern surgery, as Zahrawi in Islamic Spain. His name is known as Al-Bukassis. I don't know how they get this Al-Bukassis, but it's Zahrawi, whose manuscript on these various surgical instruments and the various surgical instruments that he introduced were actually in use until the middle of the 19th century. Just like Ibn Sina's Al-Qanun fi al-Tibb was in use and was the basic medical tract, because Ibn Sina, I want to reiterate, his Al-Qanun fi al-Tibb was an amalgamation, a kind of compilation of all of the medical knowledge that existed at the time, whether it is Indian, Persian, Chinese, or the Greek and Islamic. So it was really a polymath that put all this thing together. And that's why it's so important, and it was so significant that it has been translated, retranslated, re-edited in Europe for so many years and was in use all the way until the 17th century. Did I say MacArthur? McCarthy I meant MacArthur Award. That's the Genius Award for Nancy Saraisi, who worked on the editions of Al-Qanun fi al-Tibb. As another, medical instruments that Az-Zahrawi. So if the plurality is one issue of Islamic medicine that makes it unique, the other, it's medical ethics. And so ethics, once again, the medicine is not purely for the elite. And so you have books that are written by physicians are for those who cannot afford a doctor. It's actually started with Al-Razi, who wrote a book called Man Lam Yahdurhu Tabib, that is, where there is no doctor. An equivalent book in the West, that is in Tunisia, was written by a physician, the physician of the Fatimid Caliphate, when the Fatimids were based in Mahdiya in Tunisia, called Ibn al-Jazzar. Ibn al-Jazzar wrote a book called Kitab Tibb al-Fuqara wal-Masakin, that is, those who could not afford any of these books. Ibn al-Jazar actually, just like Al-Razi in the East, had this three-tier examination system. So he would have 2 floors. He will be on the upper floor, and his students are down at the first floor. And if the students were not able to deal with the medical issue of this patient, they will send him upstairs to the chief physician. Now, Ibn al-Jazar would receive the patient, and it'll be about 3 or 4 scribes sitting down, writing his observations, and immediately what he is saying and what is the observations being written is translated into other languages, and more specifically Hebrew, because that was also how medical knowledge was brought into Europe through the translation from Arabic to Hebrew to Latin. So Ibn al-Jazar was the same phenomena as Al-Razi in the East, and many of his books were translated into Latin and became the basis for medical knowledge in Spain as well as in France. So in addition to Ibn al-Jazar, al-Zahrawi, as I mentioned, the father of modern surgery, it is incredible the advances that had been made. Respiratory system is, you can see all of these diagrams, indication of the specific knowledge that they had. Again, that's Ibn al-Nafis, and the pulmonary tracts and the flow of blood and circulation. And lastly, I just want to talk about zoology. Zoology or علم الحيوان was animal husbandry. It's an important aspect of the culture of the civilization. Horses, for example, cows, all of these things needed to be based on knowledge. And so this particular illustration of the giraffe and its characteristics from Al-Jahad of Kitab Al-Hayawan, which was initially a translation of Aristotelian tract of Book of Animals. And here again, you get the horse with all of its parts, and it's in a diagram and in a illustration. And finally, of course, you know, the scorpions, very, very prevalent in the Middle East. And you need to know about this stuff so that you can survive all of the dangers. So Islamic civilization and all of the sciences became, as I mentioned earlier, the subject of translation. Not only the scientific textbooks, but also the philosophical textbooks. One of the major philosophers of the West, Muslim West, was Ibn Rushd, or Averroes. And Averroes has written so many Aristotelian tracts and commentaries on Aristotle as a philosopher. The important thing about Aristotelian philosophy is that it's experimental. It's scientific, in the sense that if you want to understand a phenomena, you have to gather as much information as possible regarding that phenomena so that you can understand its manifestation. So Averroes actually became very controversial in the West because eventually one of the things that he had said, several things that I always mention in connection to Averroes, is that the first thing he said is that, and that's why he became controversial for the Christian church, is that there are scientific truths and there are religious truths. And if these truths conflict one another, we'll have to take the scientific truth because we can see it, we can demonstrate it. And eventually he had a following in Europe called the Latin Averroists. And of course, those were a thorn in the side of the papacy because papacy wanted to monopolize not only power, but also knowledge. So the other thing is actually very, very significant that Averroes said. He says any society that does not educate its women is a failing society because they are producing ignorant half of the society that become a liability on the other half of the society, and therefore is always be a drag. And so indeed, that's like a 12th century, 13th century Muslim philosopher, Muslim thinker, a physician, a polymath, exhorting the education of all members of society. And I want to stop right here. Thank you very much.
One quick question if someone.
Assalamu alaikum.
But I'm wondering why scorpions is important for scorpion. Why is it important?
Why the scorpions?
Yeah, why do they?
It's actually all animals, all God's creation. I mean, there's, you know, as you saw, there's something about the horse, there's something about the giraffe, there's something about the scorpion, there's something about sheep, there's something. So I just selected these things as an illustration of the variety of interest that they have. And once again, you know, these are poisonous. And so you really need to know, you know, the ins and outs, and so to avoid them. Yeah. There's something about scorpions, for example. There's a big proverb in Arabic. It says, مطرح الحية افرش ونام مطرح العقرب لا تقرب. You know, this where the, and so this comes out of knowledge, you know, where there is a scorpion, don't come across because they're always there. Whereas if there is a snake, you know, the snake is always, don't worry about it. You can rest and go to sleep. So, I mean, that comes, you know, accumulated knowledge. But yeah, I just selected this out of the many illustrations that you can find.
First off, question, just I know toward the end, he said that through Islam, through Muslims, when they taught the Jewish people, and the Jewish people went to the European.
Yeah.
In terms of science and
yeah, some aspects like Ibn al-Jazzar specifically, yes, he was translated into Hebrew and then from Hebrew into Latin, or even Jewish doctors in southern France, for example, needed to know, and therefore they were reading his so that they can also offer their services to their clientele.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahmood Ibrahim, for this beautiful and inspiring two-part series that we all learned so much from. It was very enlightening. Please join us right now for Duhur prayer. And after that, we have Arabic poetry with Dr. Heather Lard and her team. So please stay for that. For children, it will be in our social hall. For adults, it will be upstairs in our youth hall. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum.